Hi everyone, welcome to Build's Character. Today we have a special guest. We got Lauren Urban, our community manager, and of course we have James Haeck, our lead writer at D&D Beyond, and we're talking about group patrons. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone in the group is a warlock, though you should be.
I mean, that's one way to have a group that all have the same patron. We could talk about that too, but that's a slightly different conversation.
Everyone go all Kraken all the time. No, yeah. So this is appearing in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is available for pre-sale right now on D&D Beyond. You can just click on that link in chat right now and buy that book. But it was originally introduced in Explorer's Guide. No, not Explorer's Guide. Sorry, it was originally introduced in Eberron. So let's talk a bit about how this functions and how we like to use it. I am a big fan of this. I think this is something that innately exists or has existed in D&D just by organic nature, right? Like you're going to eventually have a campaign where you are part of like some kind of guild, or you often have a quest giver, but the idea that you have kind of like a boss or you're part of a much bigger organization has always kind of been in the wind. And we saw this certainly a great deal with Acquisitions Incorporated, I would say. Omendron is a group patron and a cruel one at that. So James and Lauren, can you kind of break down what these are and what they're good for?
Yeah, so group patrons, as Todd said, originated in Eberron Rising from the Last War. There's a whole part of character creation dedicated to establishing a group patron. And the reason why they crop up in Eberron is because Eberron has this kind of post-World War I, kind of more modern-ish magic punk fantasy element to it, where you're not just adventurers who are wandering about the wild wastes of the Faerun heartland looking for giants to slay. You may be based out of Sharn, City of Spires, and there are a number of various different patrons there. You could be a part of the Clifftop Adventurers Guild, or you could be part of a dragon-marked house, part of the government of the city. You could be part of a newspaper organization. You'd be part of the university. There's a lot of established institutions in Eberron that have money and power and influence, and thus could want adventurers to kind of spread that influence around the continent of Corvair. And so that's how these things got started in Eberron. In Tashas, the concept is expanded to be less setting specific and to be a little bit broader so that you can use it in any home game. Like Todd, you just said Acquisitions Incorporated is, it's a bit of a corporate culture parody, but it's absolutely, it can fit into even some of the more high fantasy, sword and sorcery D&D settings. And go on, Lauren.
Well, I was going to say, I think we've seen that kind of stuff in the D&D more fantasy established settings. I mean, if you go to Waterdeep, there's all of these guilds that you can be a part of. You can join the Watchful Order of Magicians Protectors. You can join the Harpers. You can be a Zentarum agent. You can be all of this. And so these are factions and organizations and communities that are available as backstory elements, or that are available as ways for your party, maybe even later on, to go find jobs or information. But the idea of tying your entire party together officially with one of these groups is a little bit new, and I love it because I'm a big fan of start your party off all either knowing each other or having a tie to each other already. I mean, Todd joked about them all being patrons of the same, being a warlocks of the same patron, but I've done that before. I've done the all cleric game. I've done the all Aarakocra game. I've done, and so this is kind of a more broad way of, we're all part of the same organization, and it gives you some ties to the other characters right away that can be really helpful, especially in those early levels as you're feeling things out and like, well, why are we hanging out together? What's the purpose of this group? Like, it's fine to be the group of misfits who join up to solve a problem and then become a found family. That's super cool. Sometimes it's a little better to have some of those ties, and showing up in Waterdeep and already being members of a guild can be really helpful.
It's also a great point of tension too, Like if not everyone is part of the same group patron, like what if it's a split, right? Like, or you have multiple patrons, that becomes interesting. But you're right, like in D&D, if you look at like Dragonlance, there's the Order of High Sorcery, you know, the Towers of High Sorcery, and you've got the red mages, you've got the black robed mages, you got the white robed mages. And so this fits nicely, especially like I like the structure of it, because as a dungeon master, you can only use more tools. You know, if I want everyone to work for Xanathar, which is a terrible idea, you know, I can kind of like come up with a structure of like how this works. Like, some people are going to leave you alone, right? Like, depending on who your patron is, some people are going to hate you, some people are going to love you, some people are going to tolerate you. And in what we've seen in Eberron, there are lots of benefits. Can we walk through some of those benefits?
Yeah, the main goal of these group patrons is to create a structure for your campaign, really. They're just as useful in terms of gaining benefits for players, or they are for giving the DM a way to kind of keep the campaign from just being sort of wandering from story to story. If your players are up for it, a group patron can be like a common quest giver that they will return to maybe every session, maybe every 3, 5, 10 sessions. Maybe the group patron isn't always breathing down the player character's neck, demanding that they go do something, right? That can feel a little bit oppressive, a bit like a railroad. Maybe the group patron is just kind of there giving occasional quests, saying, hey, we've got a lot of people out in the field right now. If you'd like to take this, we have a reward available, but we're not demanding it. We've got plenty of other people who can take the job too. So it's just another way of how can we get some treasure? How can we go on an adventure? So in Eberron, the book provides a number of different ways about how the patrons work, including a number of example patrons. There's basically 10 different examples in Eberron. It talks about what the organization is like, where their headquarters, their allies, and their enemies. Each patron type also includes suggestions for various roles the characters in your party could take on, including suggestions of class, background, skills that are useful for filling that role. I think this dovetails really well, actually, with the specialized roles in Acquisitions Incorporated. If you want to be the cartographer of your group and get that magic map, or if you want to be the documancer and keep track of everything, you might even want to adapt those funky roles to a more serious group patron setting. There's possibilities regarding the patron's background and the character's roles in it, right? Role-playing opportunities that can kind of tie each character in the party together, including the kinds of adventures and missions that you might do on behalf of that patron. And then what every character is looking for, benefits that the group gets from the patron, everything from monetary compensation to equipment to special privileges and new training. And then finally, a list of potential contacts that can serve as your personal connection to the patron. So it's really a whole package for DMs and players alike that they get to delve into.
And you get something a little similar. It actually just got brought up in chat. Nymouse just mentioned the Slayer's Take from Critical Role. So if you're playing in Wildmount, there's certainly all of these organizations that are set up there that you can not only use as parts of your backstory or parts of your character, but literally join and use as a hub, use as a place to gain quests, you know, especially for the Slayer's Take, or I'm trying to remember the name in campaign 1 of the Monster Slayer guilds that was in
that is the Slayer's Take.
Is that okay? Then I'm thinking, okay, in campaign 2 there's also like some of the underground organizations that you can join, like the Gentleman's Organization.
Yeah, like there's the Myriad, there's the Cerberus Assembly, there's the Cobalt Soul. Wildmount is chock full of cool organizations that can be group patrons.
A very, very political game and political campaign setting. So this kind of stuff is perfect for that. Another good thing to note, though, is, you know, say if you like to play a little bit more nefarious characters, this is good guidance for how you would want to structure your organization. And it is mentioned that, like, you would treat, like, if you wanted to be a patron for other people, and start your own organization. And I've actually played this. I played a patron to the rest of the party. I wasn't like dictating orders, but like I had to come up with funds. And so in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there is a set of rules for downtime activities for running a legitimate business. Well, not a legitimate business. It doesn't have to be legitimate, but for running a business. And that could be a very fun meta game to playing D&D in general. And it's something that you see very often in other role-playing games. Like Vampire Masquerade is entirely based on what clan you're in, right? And that's why I like the idea of patrons and how much this kind of shifts the type of game that you could be playing and helps very well define for your players, like what are they getting out of this situation and what are they losing. It's a kind of like a shiftable background. Like when you look at, really, if you take a hard look at your backgrounds when you choose them, if you take the pirate, yeah, you get some skills and some tools, but like what it's really about is when you like steal someone's beer in a tavern, people will tend to leave you alone. Like you can invoke these things as your backgrounds that kind of like shift the dynamics of like what is happening in that scene. And this does this like top to bottom of D&D, and that's what I love this stuff.
And this isn't just a party cohesion thing. This is also a really good way if you're starting up a campaign for all of the players in the DM and the group to have a much clearer idea of the type of game you're going to play. If the game that everybody agrees on is starting out, at least with all of you joining the Watchful Order of Magicians and Protectors in Waterdeep and being associated with that organization in some way, shape, or form, that indicates a level of the type of character you want to play in that campaign. If you're law-abiding citizens in a large city, then you're probably not being the chaotic evil person who's stealing from stuff. You don't necessarily have to be a wizard character, but the style of character that you're going to create, someone who's going to want to work as this team, someone who's going to want to help other people, and maybe have some political machinations in the future because of being in the city. That's going to be a completely different feeling campaign than going and being in the Slayer's Take and kicking down doors and slaying monsters. That's a different style of character and a different party cohesion. And so by picking this from the beginning, I'm kind of a fan as a DM of presenting to my players, here's 5 organizations you can be a part of to start. You know, game 1, you're already a part of this organization. You've already done submissions for them. Here's information on all of these patrons, what they're going to give you, what they're not going to give you, and their expectations. And what my players choose is going to help me as the DM give them opportunities to be the awesome heroes who want to go save the world, the monster slayers who just want to get loot, the political people who want to work from behind the scenes, pirates, whatever they want to be. It helps. And then it helps me as a player. Maybe I'll craft my character to work within the setting. I can still be my own unique version, but if I've decided that I'm going to join a pirate guild, I probably actually want to get on a boat. I probably want to do something on the ocean. You know, you can kind of set yourself up for success as a character when you know in advance the story parameters that you're walking into, and having this group patron really helps.
I totally agree. Like it is a great using patrons is fantastic, and setting up multiple ones, right? Really allows your players to like kind of like double down on that, choosing where the storyline can go, and it informs you as a DM. A very simple example of this is I ran a Star Wars campaign for 2 years, and I literally did not know what anyone was going to play. I never ran a game this big in my life with so many players. But you've got like the Empire, you've got Bounty Hunters Guild, you've got you've got the Rebellion, and you set up all these places they can work for, and you ask them. It's great to have these kind of adventures where you're like, what do you want to do? And then they went and decided to basically steal stuff from everyone, start a pirate fleet. And this is the opportunity you get to really kind of drill down on what your players enjoy the most out of D&D. And I think if you have several of these patron options available for even your session 0, it can sculpt immediately what you as a DM want to provide for your players so quickly. But like Lauren said, maybe you're a new player, or you're more free and open to play just about anything. Once you know what the kind of the dynamics, the politics of what's about to happen, or the different powers at play, then that can inform your choice of what you choose much easier. Like if I know there's a monster slayer guild, I am down, right? Like, or a bounty hunter guild, okay, that's what I want to do. Like I'm just gonna be collecting bounties all day, especially with Mandalorian 2 coming out.
And
so,
this can stem from adventures too. If your party and your DM have decided I'm gonna play Icewind Dale, not only do you now have an idea of the campaign, but sometimes getting into that campaign can be a little difficult. Well, if there is a patron that is tying your group together that is now associated with the adventure Icewind Dale, then that helps that start. Starting a campaign can always be really difficult. Why are we here? Why are we helping these people? Why is this, what is this getting for me? And having a patron that can point you in the campaign direction, it's point me down the road I need to go, even if there's branching paths. Get me on the highway. So
I recently, April, beginning of quarantine, I started a campaign that unwittingly revolved entirely around a campaign being gathered by a group patron. The characters in this ongoing campaign were gathered by a sort of secret society of adventurers and mercenaries. Also, trainers, kind of like an adventuring academy / mercenary guild that operates from within the catacombs of a grand cathedral on an island city-state. And so the characters, in addition to pursuing their own goals and personal motivations and sort of the broader plot that the vampire lord Golthias is planning across the world, they occasionally can take on contracts in various nations that surround this island city. And so they can kind of choose adventuring side quests that dovetail with the stuff that they want to do from a character or plot perspective. And that makes it like, have you ever played an MMO like World of Warcraft where you kind of get like 8 quests at once and you try and complete them all very efficiently and then turn them all in at once?
Yeah.
Like that, it's very much the same feeling. You can get that feeling of, I'm doing so many things on this adventure right now, and it never feels like I'm wasting my time. And that's a very good feeling, I think, for a lot of D&D players.
Yeah, absolutely. And the freedom of, I know a person I can go to get some information. I know a person I could go to get a quest. I think all campaigns have had that moment in where the players kind of look at each other and go, okay, now what? What's going on? Knowing, we got a person who will at least have something that they want us to do. And even if we don't take it, that's right there going to help inform, okay, what do we actually want to do? So just having that person to go to is super helpful for everybody involved.
They have the option, but it's not an obligation.
Exactly.
Well, and it's interesting if it is an obligation, and like how many shows have we watched? How many narratives do we see where, what happens when, like, look at John Wick. Like, he's clearly a part, he either has a patron or he's part of a guild. But, what happens when you go against that? When you go against that grain, all these things, all these benefits that you have go away. And being able to shift allegiances between different patrons is like very, you've got a lot of really fun things that can happen. Here's some examples from Eberron. Say you want to do a crime syndicate. I love these ideas of the assignments that you might be doing. You might be getting like 15% for jobs that you run for this particular crime guild, right? I mean, crime syndicate, there's contraband, there's fencing that you can be doing, there's immunity to certain things because you're part of this patron, and everyone just kind of leaves you alone. And then there's even like businesses that are kind of like on the take. Like if you're thinking of things like, Peaky Blinders or any kind of crime syndicate like that, you can like, maybe there are illicit, items that you're selling all the time. Maybe you're making alchemist fire for this company, right? And and you're providing protection for like these shipments all the time. Like it gives a lot. I don't want to say busy work to the players, but it gives aspirations beyond just leveling up. Where you're just like, oh, I can't wait till I get 6th level. I'm like, I can't wait till I have like, I've taken over like the Western region and I am the main crime boss. Right? Having that as a goal that you've earned through role play is incredibly exciting, and I think that's what this really can help introduce for players and dungeon masters alike. Like, it's not just the subclass that you're looking at in your class. That's just part of it. Like, you can have these aspirations of like either forming your own organization, moving up in it, manipulating the systems between these two patrons. And again, it's like a chessboard. Like, you as the player are one piece, and then if you know what the other pieces are, you can go in so many different directions and think of story elements that you would want to explore.
What can you do in the world beyond just getting better at killing monsters?
Right. Right.
And this kind of dovetails into a question we had in chat from the Danik, who wanted to know, there may be many examples, but I'm still very new. What would be a good way to set up, or examples of information patron organizations that are more than owing favors versus outright just taking money? So like, there's a whole bunch of examples of these organizations, like you were talking about, and where, all right, you're taking over, and but this is more what's something that you can dive into as an organization that is more about that role playing instead of just I'm going to take a job to go get money. And I think what Todd talked about was a great example of that. James?
If he's talking about an information organization that's more about trading favors and not just like about stealing stuff, kind of like a less outright evil sort of thieves guild. There are a couple of options for you here in Eberron, and I can only assume in Tashas once it comes out. There's a type of group patron here called the Inquisitive Agency. Here's the description they give for it. Your party works for an agency offering investigative services, or you might run your own firm as a group. Inquisitives put their keen minds and dogged determination to use unraveling mysteries. Inquisitive agencies run the gamut from private investigators to networks of detectives supported by the dragon-marked houses. So Eberron can be a very noir setting right now, and a key staple of the noir theme is the private investigator. So this type of group patron doesn't have to be, you are Sam Spade smoking at your desk, but you could have a structure of people all working together to take down major power structures from the inside. You might even be contacted by the state as like someone needing spy work. And in fact, there's a different group patron also, the espionage agency.
Exactly.
The fantasy MI6.
Absolutely. you get that you've got assignments that maybe strongly imply that you should do. But you've got an expense account, you've got identification papers, so you can like flash a badge, that kind of thing, or your license to kill, essentially, and then powerful friends. That's so fun to delve into. And again, I love that structure.
So Daniel, if you're looking for good guides on how to create agencies like this, who like trading favors and seeking information, when Tasha's is out, I just say get the book. I wouldn't recommend it if it wasn't the best option here. But all of these different types of organizations that will be in Tasha's give you exhaustive breakdowns of how they can be used in your game. And you could just spend minutes, hours reading this stuff and just absorbing it into your DMing brain.
I also like the potential for extremely high level play in this scenario. Like, again, like so often, I think a lot of people initially when they play D&D, you have this picture, and a lot of this is, second edition art and first edition art in your brains. I'm in a dungeon, I'm fighting a dragon, or I'm killing giants out in the middle of the wilderness. But what if you're all in charge of a kingdom, right? And there is a king, but you're all part of that court, and you're all responsible for all these different things. And you've got like unlimited funds. You have to go on these political intrigue missions. You have to kind of be each other's muscle and handle these things. Like there's a lot of potential with all of these different patrons. I love the newspaper patron from Eberron because it's so off the wall to me. Because I wouldn't necessarily automatically think about that, right? Like, I think there's a lot of potential there for like, there's kind of some spycraft maybe involved, you know, being the snoop, but also, I mean, just the influence of the passing of information from place to place, or informing on all of these other patrons that exist, using a newspaper in that way is exceptionally fun as well.
That is, I'm going to steal this transition because it's amazing. Speaking of passing along information, we had a question in chat that James is perfect to answer. So we have someone in chat who is starting Rime of the Frost Maiden with a new group and decided to prime the adventure with the Encounter of the Week Luskan Delivery series. And so their question is, does the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything help you build that organization into a patron, or is that more about offering a choice from a range of patrons? So do you want to talk about the Luskan delivery service and those encounters of the week a little bit? And how, I mean, that's a perfect example of some of the patron ideas we're talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So in case you are listening, you don't know, in the lead up to Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden, I created an Encounter of the Week series called Icewind Mail, in which you play as members of...
I don't know why I'm still laughing. I've read it like 1,800 times.
It's still good.
It's still good. It still works.
It's kind of, it was a humorous series to pair with the kind of bleak horror of Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Yeah.
And in it, it's a very structured series where you play as members of the Luskan Deliverers, who are a non-canon organization based out of the pirate city of Luskan, who go into the north on dangerous, the most dangerous deliveries possible. And if you wanted to, you absolutely could use the suggestions in Tashas to build the Lusker Deliverers out into a larger organization with sort of the patron rules. Now, here in Eberron, I would say that the options available to you are not, there's nothing that says post office. As great as that would be, there's no group patron in Eberron that's just post office. You might be able to get something, but you could find ideas in, say, Adventurers Guild or Inquisitive Agency, or even newspaper, I think.
What I also like about the Luskan Deliverers is that moment in where you're sitting with your players thinking about running Icewind Dale, and everybody's excited about the setting, but nobody really wants to run a horror campaign. You know, if you're like, ooh, you know, being in that world sounds awesome, but not into the horror thing. Here's a way to get into the cold, frigid north and have fun in the snow without having to do the horror stuff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of perfect for taking some of these adventures and cannibalizing them for their resources for the stuff that your players will find fun if you're into the setting and not necessarily the adventure.
Mm-hmm.
It's really great. It's also another great way, and this is the thing I love the most that people sometimes forget in D&D, is like, just because something is more powerful than you doesn't mean you can't talk to it. Right? Like, that includes monsters. Listen, wizards, dragons, mainly they need things delivered. Like, you know, imagine the things that you might be like associating yourself with at very high levels. And like, as you get increasingly good at this, like, what happens when you're like delivering things to and from Avernus, right? Or the Feywild or the Shadowfell? One of my, because these adventures that these encounters that you did, it made the fact that it was based off delivering stuff made me think of Good Omens right away. If you've read or seen Good Omens, there is a mail delivery guy who is giving each of the 4 horsemen their item to let them know that the end of the world is nigh. And it's hilarious to watch this poor guy's journey as he has to go to like war, famine, and the interchange between them, these you know, almost godlike beings, and this guy's just doing his best, his job. and then it ultimately has to, I mean, spoiler alert, he has to talk to Death, which is not great either. But that's the kind of opportunities you can really get out of these patrons, is having these conversations. Like if you're working for Jarlaxle, right? Now you get to role play with Jarlaxle almost every day. I mean, that's super fun and enticing. Like, I imagine Xanathar is like the worst boss you've ever had in your imagination. Like, what if you work for him and you're desperately trying to find a way out? And that's the beginning of the adventure. It's like this reverse, like you're just trying to get out from under your patron.
And go for it.
There's one question. I want to move on to sidekicks soon, but there's a question that I feel I would be remiss not to answer from D-Banks that asks, how would you advise players move through the ranks in an organization and balance their benefits from pursuing this? This is something I'm doing in my current campaign, and I've just stolen renown from the Dungeon Master's Guide, right? In the sort of core factions, you can gain renown as you do missions and advance. And that is one of the benefits to completing the missions that in my campaign, the Academy sends the characters out on. They will load up on missions before they leave and aim to complete them. Not just because they'll be rewarded with gold, but because they will gain renown upon completion. Just a point of renown, maybe 2 for a big mission. But as these stack up, not only do they rise in ranks, they recently rose in my campaign from initiates to the second rank, which are called gallants. And that has not only given them access to harder missions, which is by design. They've gained levels, so I want to give them harder missions, but also they can requisition special arms and armor from the Academy now, as long as they give it back at the end of the mission. If they know they're fighting lycanthropes, they can say, well, I'd really like to get a silver longsword before I go on this mission. And the Academy will be like, well, bring it back in one piece. And they'll be like, okay. And so as this goes on, it is a little bit up to you to decide what rewards you want to give to your characters as they move up through the ranks of your organization. But just kind of treat it as like a special class feature almost, that every character in the party gets some little bonus that the organization gives to them as they are more and more trusted and kind of gain more and more renown, not just among the organization, but also about people who know about it.
I've got a similar thing with my campaign that I'm running, that one of my players is a wizard who has joined the Watchful Order of Magists and Protectors. And so I just created an actual organizational layout of like, all right, all these different levels that you can be at, and each level gets you different perks from the organization, access to more rare components for spells, access to the silent library to be able to get access to more spells, places in where you can actually experiment with alchemical substances, help with information, with getting places, and at way higher levels, just straight out teleportation services, and laying that all out for your players at the beginning. Oh, hey, you're a level 1. Well, after you've gained this much renown, after you've done these certain things, after you've shown that you've reached a certain trustworthy levelness, you'll get promoted to level 2. And at level 2, you get this. And at level 3, you'll get this, and then you can just be flexible depending on what your players are doing, and it kind of goes both ways, because the higher you are in a rank in an organization, the more likely you are to work to keep that organization going and worthwhile, and you may even be encouraging others to join that organization and espousing the benefits of that, and then, as Todd just talked about, taking it over. So definitely laying that out, though, right at the beginning for your players, if they're looking at joining an organization, going like, all right, here's some of the things you'll have to do in order to advance, but then here's some of the perks you'll get, is a real boon for players, because then I know some of the steps I have to take to get to level 3 when I get to access the teleportation services. So
that's interesting, because you could almost create an alternate loot system of, once you get this far in the ranks, like, okay, you start off and you can use some common magical items, but then you can eventually get to uncommon and then even rare items that you check out. But also there are penalties when you don't bring this stuff back, or there's like, you can only have it for 3 days, you know, just like books, you know, checking out books out of a magical library. They do expect you to bring that stuff back, and that creates a new form of tension that is more than just like, I killed a bunch of goblins and I got this loot. You're given an allowance. I mean, like you've been given your laptop. Please turn it back in, you know, as a certain amount of time.
And like with that in mind, I think it's important to say that, like, if this doesn't sound fun to you, if you get enough of that in your work life already, you don't need to incorporate organizations like this into your campaign. If you really want the fantasy of being a bunch of lone rangers out in the West, living off your own guile and the support of the grateful townsfolk whom you save, hell yeah, dude. I mean, you don't need to be working for the cops or the library or the newspaper or whatever.
But but yeah, and it's also a good example of how to, like, just because these patrons exist doesn't mean you can't, as a DM, use these structures. Just because this patron isn't being used by your players doesn't mean you can't create these structures to create these patrons that are enemies.
Yeah.
And now you know what their henchmen are allowed to get away with, right? Like, people turn the other way, you know, what kind of missions they're going to be going on. It's a good framework for, okay, I've got these evil organizations. What are they up to? How much money are they making? Like, okay, wait, they're making 15% every time they steal. Like, okay, well, they're probably like a little annoyed by that. You know, like there's all kinds of ways you can take like a player option and make it a DM option for pure villainy.
Pre-order Tasha's Cauldron of Everything on D&D Beyond and unlock exclusive pre-order rewards, including digital dice.